Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. Today we're going to make another version of a tapering jig for making little wedges. And if you're new to the channel or if you just haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do that. Click the notification bell and let's get started with making this tapering jig. One of the things I've discovered about woodworking is sometimes when we make a jig for one purpose, it doesn't always work for doing a similar kind of function for another one. Let me show you one of the jigs I made not long ago. This is the jig I made some time ago, and it's more for making tapered legs for things like tables and that sort of thing. And this part here, of course, is all adjustable, and it's got a couple of different catches for attaching the wood to, and it works great, but for doing quick, simple tapers, it's a big hulking thing to move around. We're going to make something much quicker today. And I'll put a link to that tapering jig at the end of this video, but let's get started on this one. Now basically I want this jig to look like a 30-60 degree angle triangle like this one. So the first thing we need to do is get some wood. I took a minute to cut some 3-inch wood off camera. Now we're going to cut it to length so that we can make a triangle out of it. Now to cut my top angle, I need to cut a 60 degree angle, so I've set my miter gauge. It's actually set at 30 degrees, and for this cut I'm going to be pulling it through the saw because this is the safest place to be. Now I need to make another angle cut, and I've set my miter gauge at 60 degrees now because that's the cut that I need to make for that. And you can see that I've made a line in here so that I need to bring that right to the edge of the table saw, and I'll do the same thing. I'll pull it through so that it's the safest way to do that. Now the next thing I need to do is to put a line right down there so I can cut that base off. That'll also be 60 degrees. Well, there's our little jig coming together very nicely. Now I've agonized on what to do to fasten these edges together. This 90-degree angle is easy. You could use pocket holes down here, lots of things you could do. These other corners, these angled corners, are a little bit more difficult. Here's what I'm going to do. And the reason I don't want to use screws or nails anywhere around here is if I'm ever at a point where I'm running this through the saw, I don't want my saw blade to ever have to strike nails or screws anywhere in this if this jig was off, or if it came apart somehow or did something like that. I want it to be able to cut wood, so that's why I'm going to be using these 1/4-inch dowels. Now I just reconfigured my dowel so that I can drill down this way, and I also have to change the depth of my drill bit. Okay, I just want to take a moment and do a dry fit. And if you're new to my channel, you'll notice that sometimes I put blue tape, and I put that on the face of things. And don't ever be embarrassed to have to mark things so that you know exactly where things are. It'll save you time, and it'll save you making mistakes. There we go. Okay, that's good. Let's glue that on. There we go. Now that'll be rock solid. And now that the glue is dry, we'll just take those little pins off of there. Well, there's our finished little jig, and that's really all it is. It's a little triangle. But what we're going to use it for, we're going to be able to fasten it to our miter gauge, and then we can adjust the miter gauge to any kind of specific angle and cut wedges. And the nice thing with it, this kind of a jig, is that we can use it this way or we can use it this way. So we can cut longer ones or we can cut shorter ones. If there's some reason that you need to use the other side, it's possible to do that. We can even switch the miter gauge to the other side. So there's lots of different options that we can do with this. And we're going to cut some wedges here in a minute. What this is not good for is cutting tapered legs. And the first jig that I showed you earlier in this episode is exactly that. And the reason this one's not good, you can cut one side, but then when you've cut the side off, when you flip it over, you either have to put the piece you've cut off and you also have to wedge it because there's the thickness of the blade. So it gets to be a little bit of a nightmare to cut tapered legs with a jig like this. But it's going to do other tapers just perfectly, and I'm going to show you what it does. Now, before you get started, here's another example. Remember we did the clamp thing not long ago. Remember I showed you how you can put a knob on there. And the reason you want to do that is because this one, when I tighten it on, the bar comes down so that when you would try and push that through, it's going to jam up on that. So there's another good reason that you should have at least one clamp that you can just put a knob on the end of it for little tight areas. So what I like about this design, of course, you can change this to whatever angle fits you, but you can also move it back and forth here, and you just simply clamp that. It's a nice design. The other thing that I really like is now I can make thicker wedges, and I very often need something a little bit thicker than just, say, a 3/4 inch. And with this, I can actually make whatever size wedges I want, thick or thin, and I don't have to worry about running to the hardware store and buying them every time. So let's do a couple of quick tests here and see what this looks like. And there's just a few examples of the kind of wedges you can expect to make. There's a 3/4 inch wide, quite a stout little wedge. There's a very thin, small little wedge for different things. This is one that I would typically use on my planer when I'm using my planing jig to try and flatten boards. Lots of different options for making some good quality, very even wedges. Well, that concludes my video on making the tapering jig, and of course it's for use with the miter gauge on your table saw. It doesn't look like much, but boy, it sure works slick, and I'm amazed how versatile it is. So another jig to add to my collection. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.